Hey guys, tonight we're wrapping ourselves, literally, into the folds of ancient Rome's most iconic, awkward, and surprisingly political fashion statement, the toga. You might think it's just a draped sheet, something you'd throw on at a college party, or see in some museum diorama. But tonight, you're gonna wear it. 6 meters of itchy, off-white wool, folded just so, clinging to one shoulder, dragging behind you like a heavy, judgmental cape. You try to walk, it bunches. You shift your arm, it slips. You sit down, it tries to strangle you. And here's the twist: Roman senators, those pillars of law, order, and dramatic hand gestures, often wore their togas wrong on purpose. Not just once or twice, but as a coded act with surprisingly sharp consequences. And no, you probably won't survive this toga trial without tripping over your own hem. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with your location and what time it is where you're watching from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's early morning in the Roman Forum, and you can already feel the heat rising from the cobblestones. You're standing in a cramped dressing stall, the kind usually reserved for slaves, while a grumpy old servant tries to wrap you in something that looks like a woolen bedsheet with ambitions. You're sweating before the first fold's even tucked. This is the toga, the most recognizable garment of ancient Rome. A badge of citizenship, masculinity, and, unfortunately, a total nightmare to wear. 6 to 7 meters of heavy wool, no pins, no belts, just gravity, experience, and the will to suffer through public life with dignity. Or at least, the illusion of it. As the servant yanks the cloth across your chest, you begin to realize that the toga wasn't designed with comfort or practicality in mind. It wasn't for walking far, sitting comfortably, or even using your arms freely. It was for being seen. A status symbol that said, "I am rich enough to wear this ridiculous thing and have others help me do it." Historians still argue whether the toga evolved from earlier Etruscan cloaks, or whether it came about specifically to torture future generations of senators. Either way, by the time of the Republic, wearing a toga became a requirement for Roman male citizens attending official functions, court cases, and Senate meetings. It was the uniform of power, even if it felt more like a woolen prison. The toga wasn't just one thing, either. There were many types: the toga virilis, the plain white one for adult male citizens, the toga praetexta, edged in purple for magistrates and boys of noble birth, and the toga candida, bleached to a blinding white for political candidates trying to look pure. Ironic, yes. As you struggle to keep the folds from slipping off your left shoulder, you realize something odd. Some senators seem to wear theirs differently. A bit looser, a little frumpy even. You spot one older man letting his hem drag dramatically in the dust, like a fashion-forward ghost. Another clutches his wool like it's a burden too heavy to bear. At first you think it's laziness, or maybe their slaves were just bad at dressing them. But soon, you'll learn, it's something much deeper. And then there's the smell. Oh, you thought Roman wool was just itchy? No, friend, it's also alive. Full of lingering oils, sweat, and the faint but unmistakable whiff of vinegar and lanolin. The toga might look white from afar, but up close, it's a battlefield of stains and subtle grime. Senators often didn't wash them as frequently as you'd hope, because laundering was expensive, and honestly, who wants to clean a glorified carpet every week? Now imagine attending court, giving speeches, or walking in a funeral procession in this thing, where posture is crucial, gestures must be precise, and dignity is everything. One wrong move and your toga could slip, your bare chest peeking out, your hem dragging in something best left unidentified. And yet, this was the expected attire of Rome's ruling class. One mainstream fact: the toga was legally required in certain settings. If you were a citizen and you showed up in a tunic to court or to vote, you could be fined or even denied entry. It was the Roman version of being turned away at the club for not wearing shoes. No toga, no service. But here's your first quirky tidbit. Some togas were so big and so elaborately folded that senators hired toga assistants, young male slaves whose full-time job was just to wrangle cloth. Imagine needing a personal stylist every time you left the house, just to avoid a wardrobe malfunction. And yet, you can't help but notice. It's almost like some of these men want their togas to look slightly off. A little droopy, a little undone. Makes you wonder, were they making a statement? Were they bending the rules, ever so slightly, to say something bigger? Historians still argue whether these toga mistakes were just fashion fails, or whether Rome's elite were playing a subtler, more dangerous game. Because in ancient Rome, even the way you wore your wool could be a political act. So here you are, sweating through your first public appearance in the Forum, clutching your toga like it might strangle you if you let go. You glance around, at the pristine folds of the young candidate to your left, at the dramatic, dragging hem of the older senator to your right, and you start to wonder, what does your toga say about you? You take one shaky step forward, trying not to trip. The cloth shifts, a breeze catches the hem. Somewhere behind you, a group of children giggle. And you realize you've entered a world where every wrinkle, every drape, every sweaty crease is a message. And you're just beginning to learn the language. You take another cautious step across the sun-baked stones, trying not to let your toga betray you. The older senators glide, or at least appear to, with practiced grace, their woolen burdens arranged just so. Meanwhile, you feel like you're dragging a wet curtain across a parade ground. A few more missteps and you'll be remembered forever as that guy whose toga fell off near the Temple of Saturn. But here's the thing, you're not just wearing any toga. Yours is the toga virilis, the toga of manhood. It's your first and it means everything. The toga virilis is plain, undyed, and a little underwhelming to look at, but in Rome, it's more than clothing, it's a rite of passage. You recall your ceremony, a quiet moment where you set aside your boyhood tunic and stepped into the world of Roman citizenship. No more childish purple borders like the toga praetexta, no more excuses. You're a man now, a citizen, and you're expected to act and dress the part. The toga virilis is your passport to the public world. It's proof that you have the right to vote, to speak in the forum, to serve in the military, and even, one day, to run for office. It's also a signal to others this person matters. Or at least he's supposed to. Historians still argue whether the toga virilis ceremony was a private, family affair or a public ritual paraded through the streets. Either way, it marked a moment of transformation, and launched young men into a world of expectations wrapped tightly around them, quite literally. As you walk through the forum, you see the social ladder represented in cloth. The toga praetexta, with its bold purple stripe, is worn by senators and magistrates, men who move with deliberate pomp, their hems just brushing the marble like they own it. Because, well, they kind of do. Purple dye wasn't just expensive, it was a symbol of power so potent, it was eventually restricted by law. Wear the wrong stripe, and you could be thrown out of the Senate. Or worse, laughed at by your peers, which might be even more fatal in Roman politics. Then there's the toga candida, the blindingly white version worn by office seekers. Candidates would chalk their togas to look extra pure, literally whitened lies. These guys strutted around like walking laundry ads, hoping their spotless appearance would distract from whatever not-so-spotless rumors followed them. And yet, despite being symbols of status, these togas were still wildly impractical. You start to notice a kind of shared suffering among the wearers. Everyone's a little uncomfortable. Everyone's adjusting, shifting, tugging. It's a performance, and like any performance, some actors are just better than others. You pass a group of young men, clearly new to the toga game, nervously straightening their folds. One of them has his drape too far back, exposing most of his neck. You can tell by the side eyes from nearby senators that he's being silently judged. Another has bunched too much fabric at the waist, giving him the unfortunate appearance of a woolen mushroom. But then, there's him. A senator standing alone, slightly to the side. His toga hangs off his shoulder just a little too much. It droops in the back. The fabric's a bit rumpled, as if thrown on in a hurry. He looks a bit undone, and people are watching him. Not with mockery. With interest, with recognition. You realize something, he's doing it on purpose. This is your first glimpse of toga manipulation as an art form. Not just dressing for status, but dressing to communicate. His subtle dishevelment says, "I'm too busy thinking about the fate of the Republic to care about neat folds." It's a humble brag in wool form, quirky tidbit. Some politicians intentionally wrinkled their togas to appear more relatable. There are anecdotes of men sleeping in them, or having slaves rumple them, just right before a speech. Think of it like the Roman version of just rolled out of bed, but still deep, Instagram aesthetics, and it worked. In a society obsessed with appearances, not caring how you looked, at least visibly, made a statement. It said you were above vanity, that you had better things to worry about. that you were, in a word, authentic. But authenticity in Rome was always a performance. The neat folds of the toga weren't just about fashion. They were moral indicators. A tidy toga. You're disciplined, orderly, maybe loyal to tradition. A messy one. Perhaps you're a man of the people. Or maybe a rebel. Or maybe just lazy. Historians still argue whether toga dishevelment was truly subversive or simply the result of poor dressing skills. But Roman sources hint at deliberate choices, especially among senators who wanted to send messages without speaking a word. You start to notice more of them now. The ones whose shoulders are slightly slouched. The ones with hems just a bit too long, dragging in the dust of the forum. These aren't mistakes. These are statements. And you realize something else in Roman society. The toga wasn't just a garment, it was a language. Every drape, every fold, every speck of chalk or streak of purple, each one said something. Whether it was, I am powerful, or I am humble, or I am above all this nonsense. The toga spoke volumes. And that makes you wonder, if some togas were worn wrong on purpose, what else were the senators saying? What secrets were stitched into the seams? What messages were being whispered through wool? You adjust your own toga, trying to mimic the senator's artful slouch. It slips a bit more than you intended, and now your left knee is showing. Oops, too relatable. A nearby vendor smirks, you'll get the hang of it eventually. But for now, you walk on, a little more aware, a little more folded, and a lot more curious. Because in Rome, fashion isn't just vanity, it's politics. And you've just taken your first step into the most uncomfortable game in town. You're starting to get used to the weight of it now. The way the wool tugs at your shoulder, how it pulls at your elbow, the constant mental math of adjusting without making it obvious. You're not just walking anymore, you're performing. Every step, every wrinkle, every tiny redrape is part of an unspoken dialogue. And that's when you begin to see it. It's not just a matter of style or comfort, it's a strategy. Senators, you notice, aren't just dressing badly because they're sloppy. They're doing it deliberately. These aren't toga fails. These are toga moves. You pass a group of older senators lounging near the steps of the Curia, and it looks like they've all just rolled out of bed. Their togas sag a little. The folds are uneven. One man has his fibula, the little brooch at his shoulder, slightly off-center. Not enough to scream, messy, but just enough to whisper, I don't care what you think. You start to understand this is what deliberate dishevelment looks like. It's not laziness, it's a message. And the message is, I have nothing to prove. The Roman elite were masters of subtlety. When everyone is dressed the same, how do you stand out? Easy. You pretend not to care. You wear your toga like it's incidental, like you're far too consumed with matters of the state to bother with symmetry. That's the genius of it. Looking above it all while still playing the game. One senator nearby has his toga draped with a single exaggerated twist. The end of the cloth trailing dramatically down his back like a cape. It's almost theatrical. Another has bunched his folds forward, creating a makeshift satchel of cloth where a scroll peeks out. Look, he seems to say, I'm so busy legislating my robe has become a filing cabinet. Historians still argue whether there were unwritten rules about how far you could take this sort of rebellion before it tipped into actual disrespect. Some think certain senators were quietly reprimanded for being too unkempt, especially if they hadn't yet earned the gravitas to pull it off. But let's be real, Roman politics was 90% theatre. If you can't speak eloquently, gesture dramatically, or at least wear your wool convincingly, what are you even doing in the Senate? There's something beautifully ironic about it. The toga began as a symbol of unity, one garment to reflect a shared citizenship. But over time, it became a canvas for individual expression, especially among the elite. And in a culture where humility was prized almost as highly as victory, appearing too perfect could be dangerous. Quirky tidbit. There are accounts of senators intentionally dirtying their togas before going into meetings, just to seem more humble, or more burdened. Dirt meant you were working. Dust on your hem. Clearly, you had just come from the provinces, serving the Republic. A bit of wear and tear said, I'm one of the hard-working ones. Never mind that your villa had a bathhouse larger than most temples. And then there's the psychological angle. A senator with a slightly askew toga could appear more thoughtful, more philosophical. Like Socrates with his unkempt beard, a messy toga hinted at a man too steeped in ideas to fuss with fabric. It wasn't about fashion. It was about virtue signaling, ancient style. You try it yourself. You loosen your fold just a touch. Let the cloth fall a bit off your shoulder. You even tilt your head slightly, like you're pondering something deep. A passing clerk nods at you, respectfully. Is it working? You don't know. But you feel different. Like maybe you've unlocked a new level of Roman social code. It's a fine line, though. Too messy, and you look like a fool. Too neat, and you look vain. The trick is to walk the tightrope, just enough disorder to seem contemplative, but not enough to suggest incompetence. This is a society where perception is everything, and senators knew it. You overhear a conversation between two junior magistrates. One is criticizing a colleague's toga for being too crisp, saying it reeks of ambition. The other chuckles and replies, "He'll never make it to console like that. He looks like he's trying too hard." Oof. In Rome, trying too hard was a crime all its own. And as you glance around, you realize the toga is more than just clothing. It's a social weapon. The folds are armor. The wrinkles are strategy. And the way you wear it can elevate, or annihilate, you. Even emperors weren't immune. Augustus himself was famous for wearing his toga in a modest, understated way, often with the hood pulled over his head like a priest during sacrifice. It made him look pious, calm, almost above the fray. Historians still argue whether this was genuine modesty or calculated image control. But the message landed. I'm not a king. I'm just a servant of the state. Sure, a servant with absolute power. But still. You brush a bit of dust from your hem, wondering if it looks accidental enough to seem authentic. You adjust your fold again, trying not to look like you're adjusting it. Every movement is a performance. Every senator, a woolen actor playing his part on the grandest stage of all, the Roman Republic. And that's when it hits you, these men weren't wearing their togas wrong. They were wearing them right, for their purposes. Wrong just enough to be meaningful. Disheveled with intent. Sloppy on the surface, but deeply calculated underneath. The toga, it turns out, was never about comfort. It was about control. Control over how you're seen. Control over what you communicate. And above all, control over your place in the pecking order. Because in Rome, even a wrinkle can be a revolution. The sun climbs higher, and now it's not just the weight of the toga pressing on you. It's the weight of meaning. You pass by a marble statue of a senator frozen mid-speech, arm outstretched, folds of stone toga caught in eternal, idealized motion. But now you know the truth. No one actually looked like that. Not in real life. That toga perfection. It's propaganda, not reality. Because reality is this. Senate steps buzzing with men who look like they've been lightly mauled by their own clothing. And yet, they rule the world. At first, you think it's chaos. But then you start seeing the patterns. The way one senator lets his toga slip from his shoulder during debate. Just a little, just enough to catch the eye. Another wraps his more tightly, signaling rigidity, righteousness. And another, oh, this one's clever, has a bit of purple peeking out where it shouldn't. Not enough to break the rules. Just enough to remind everyone of his past office. This isn't dressing, it's maneuvering. And you're watching a room full of human chess pieces, reshuffling their folds like pawns into queens. You start to realize the toga was a power tool, not just a badge of office or a mark of citizenship, but a weapon, disguised as clothing. Senators knew how to use it, and they used it on each other. You settle into a corner spot where you can observe without being in anyone's way. A debate is beginning, and the senators shuffle into their usual spots. Some stand, some sit, all of them cloaked in folds of wool that now seem less like garments and more like camouflage. The speaker rises, and his toga, a masterpiece of subtle messaging. The fabric is slightly creased along the back, suggesting he's been sitting for hours, working, perhaps, or consulting with others. His right arm is mostly free, allowing him to gesture with authority. The hem is tucked just high enough to avoid the dust, but not so high as to look vain. His shoulder is slightly exposed, just a whisper of vulnerability. It's a performance, and it's working. His words are solid, but it's the way he looks, the balance of ruffled and refined, that draws murmurs of approval. He looks real, relatable, not too polished, not too pompous. He looks like a man who's been through it and come out eloquent. Historians still argue whether toga wearing was taught formally, or whether young men simply absorbed it through imitation and humiliation. But clearly, there was a learning curve. You can now see who's mastered it, and who's still fumbling with their wool like a child with a too big blanket. And some senators. Oh, they've turned it into an art of intimidation. There's one man, broad-shouldered, face like a weathered coin, looming near the side of the curia. His toga is a disaster. Not just messy, but thoroughly undignified. The hem is stained, the shoulder sagging, the folds clumped like laundry. And yet no one dares correct him. Why? Because he owns it. His dishevelment is a threat. A message, I'm too powerful to care. He's weaponizing the sloppiness. It's not humility, it's dominance. He's projecting a kind of raw authority that doesn't need neat folds to be respected. In fact, he dares you to criticize him. You wouldn't. Not if you value your social standing, or your kneecaps. Quirky tidbit. There's evidence that some senators even scented their togas with perfumes or oils, not to smell nice, but to broadcast presence, like a woolen calling card. That's right. Ancient Rome had its version of signature scents. You could smell a rival coming before you saw him, and each man's toga had its own distinct olfactory aura, lavender, myrrh, or, in some cases, good old-fashioned sweat mixed with ambition. And it wasn't just about individual power, it was about group psychology. When multiple senators from the same faction dressed similarly disheveled, it became a visual alliance. A kind of toga clique. You'd see it during contentious votes. One group tightly wrapped, the other loose and slouching, both silently accusing the other of being too uptight or too unserious. The toga became shorthand for ideology. Conservative folds versus populist wrinkles. One group favored symmetry. Another embraced chaos, and both claimed the moral high ground. You start to wonder if there were toga spies, fabric informants, young aides trained to read the drapes and creases of their rivals like battle plans. Watch Senator Cornelius. Someone might whisper, his hem's off. He's preparing to challenge the motion. You laugh. It sounds ridiculous. But in Rome, nothing was too petty to be political. Historians still argue whether toga manipulation ever crossed into outright sabotage. Slaves subtly misfolding a rival's toga before a major speech. A slightly loosened belt, a shoulder left bare. Enough to make a senator look sloppy or worse, unstable. In a world of optics, a toga misfire could ruin a career. You remember hearing about a young senator who tripped over his own hem during a speech and was mocked for the rest of his short, humiliating life. His nickname? Calcius, or shoelace. Even though Rome didn't have shoelaces, the joke stuck anyway. That's the danger of the toga, it turns on you. Wear it too well and you look vain. Wear it too poorly and you look incompetent. Weaponize it wrong and it backfires. But get it just right, the right amount of chaos, the perfect level of carelessness. And you don't just survive, you win. You shift your own folds again, this time with purpose. A bit looser. A bit lower. You let your hem brush the steps as you sit, then adjust. Publicly, but not too obviously. You lean a little to the left, like you're deep in thought, even if you're mostly just trying not to sweat through your tunic. You're learning the dance, the choreography of cloth, the ballet of folds. And as the Senate buzzes around you, arguments rising, gestures flying, wool rustling like leaves, you realize you're beginning to see it all for what it is. Not chaos, not clumsiness, but a quiet, calculated war waged in fabric. You lean back against a cool marble column, the stone pressing into your spine through the thin fabric of your tunic beneath the toga. The forum is alive with the usual Roman symphony, clinking sandals, low murmurs, the occasional caw of a crow overhead that somehow manages to sound judgmental. You're watching the senators again, but now with new eyes. Because now you're seeing the philosophers. Specifically, the Stoics. You spot them right away, not because they're preaching from a podium, but because their togas look like they've been dragged behind a cart for a mile. And somehow, that's the whole point. The Stoic senator walks past you slowly. His toga is worn, nearly threadbare in spots, the folds hanging unevenly, one side clinging to his hip like a toddler refusing to let go. His expression is unreadable, his back a little curved, his steps deliberate. He looks like someone who could sit through a 10-hour budget debate without blinking, and possibly without breathing. You're watching a man who wears his philosophy on his sleeve, and his shoulder, and his hem. Stoicism, as you recall, wasn't just about thinking deeply while staring at olive trees. It was a full-blown worldview: embrace hardship, reject luxury, cultivate inner virtue. The toga, to a Stoic, wasn't just clothing, it was a test. A neatly arranged toga, that was vanity. A perfumed one, obscene. A toga that looked like you hadn't even bothered to fold it, perfect. Historians still argue whether Stoic philosophers in the Senate intentionally wore their togas in disarray to signal their detachment from worldly concerns, or whether they were just bad at dressing. But the pattern is clear. The more stoic a senator claimed to be, the worse his toga looked. Quirky tidbit. The philosopher Cato the Younger, a stoic, was infamous for wearing his toga without a tunic underneath. A bold, chilly, and frankly itchy decision. It scandalized the Senate. But that was the point. Cato didn't just want to say he was above indulgence. He wanted you to see it, physically, uncomfortably. And it worked. People talked. They whispered. They gawked. But they also respected it, because in a world of luxury villas and gold-threaded cushions, Cato's wool-only wardrobe stood out like a sore, shivering thumb. The Stoics weren't just being dramatic. They believed that the way you dressed reflected your soul. If you wore your toga like you didn't care, it meant you had mastered your ego. You weren't here to impress. You were here to serve Rome, uphold justice, endure suffering, and maybe eat a stale crust of bread if time allowed. You spot another senator across the forum, a younger man, clearly trying to imitate the Stoic look. His toga is definitely wrinkled, but it's too intentional. The creases fall a little too evenly. The hem is dirty, yes, but not naturally dirty. It looks staged, like someone dabbed it with a mixture of wine and dust just before he left the house. You smile to yourself. Ah, the Stoic poser. Every generation has them. Because let's face it, Stoicism was trendy, especially during the late Republic, when corruption was rampant and everyone was side-eyeing everyone else. To walk into the Senate looking like you just fought off a wool-wearing bear. That meant something. It said, I'm not one of them. But it also meant you had to suffer. You had to sit through hours of debate in a toga that scratched, bunched, and offered zero lumbar support. You had to resist the urge to readjust it every 5 minutes. You had to endure, and endure gracefully. Because if you fidgeted too much, well, then you weren't really stoic, were you? It was a test of restraint, a woolen challenge, and the stakes were high. You imagine the internal monologue of a stoic senator talk. Yes, this toga is slipping off my shoulder. Yes, it smells like goat. Yes, it's 40 degrees Celsius and I'm wrapped in a woolen burrito. But I will not complain. I will not sweat. I will sit here and contemplate virtue until my leg goes numb. You can't help but admire it, even if it sounds miserable. And here's the kicker. The Stoics influence fashion far beyond their own circles. Other senators, even those who weren't card-carrying philosophers, started mimicking the look, not because they believed in it necessarily, but because it projected a certain image, one of seriousness, depth, purpose. Suddenly, a slightly messy toga wasn't just acceptable, it was admirable. It became a kind of moral uniform. If you wore your toga too neatly, you were seen as fussy, vain, maybe even corrupt. But if you let it hang a bit loose, if you bore the discomfort without complaint, you were signaling that you were above the petty concerns of the flesh. Of course, some took it too far. You hear rumors of a senator who once arrived without a toga at all, just a rough woolen cloak, claiming it was more in line with Stoic principles. He was fined and mocked. Turns out there were limits to how far you could push the "I'm too virtuous for clean laundry" look. Still, the Stoic toga had staying power. It outlasted Cato. It persisted into the empire. Even emperors like Marcus Aurelius, who was a practicing Stoic, adopted the style. His statues show him in simple robes, his expression thoughtful, his beard perfectly uncombed. The message, I am emperor, yes, but I am also sad, deeply, nobly sad. You glance down at your own toga, wondering how to hit just the right balance between thoughtful philosopher and man whose slave slept in again. You let the back wrinkle a little. You shift your weight. You frown. Pensively, of course. A passing senator notices. He nods. Just slightly. It's working. Because in Rome, even your suffering had to be styled, and the Stoics, they made a mess look meaningful. The Senate's chamber is quieter now, at least for a moment. The hum of political posturing gives way to the sharper music of rhetoric. One voice rising above the others, punctuated by carefully timed pauses and grand flourishes of the arm. You slide a little closer, trying to get a better look. Because this is what you've been waiting for. An orator in full swing. And it's not just his voice that's commanding attention. It's everything about him. The way he stands, the way he breathes, and, most importantly, the way his toga moves. Or rather, the way he makes it move. A senator's toga wasn't just a status symbol or a virtue signal. It was a prop, a stage tool, a silent partner in the performance of public persuasion. And right now, you're watching a master actor work the wall. His toga is arranged just right, the sinus, the long, swooping fold that hangs from the left shoulder. billows slightly with each gesture, emphasizing every point. When he pauses for effect, he clutches at it dramatically, pulling it close to his chest as if to say, "This argument comes from the very heart of Rome." And the crowd eats it up. This is the Roman equivalent of a TED Talk. Except instead of a headset mic, you've got an echoing stone hall and a toga that weighs as much as a modern sleeping bag. Historians still argue whether specific toga folds were taught in rhetorical schools or passed down informally from one generation of senators to the next. But we know this much. Orators trained their bodies as much as their voices. They practiced their movements, perfected their posture, and choreographed their gestures down to the wrinkle. Because in Roman rhetoric, what you did mattered as much as what you said, and the toga. It was a visual amplifier. When the speaker raises his right arm for emphasis, the cloth shifts, catching the light. When he leans forward in mock humility, the fabric falls outward like a curtain, revealing the stark plainness of his tunic underneath. It's all intentional. Every inch of cloth is part of the message. You catch a benchmate muttering, "He's using the double clutch," and you realize there's jargon for this. The double clutch, you learn, is a technique where the orator grabs the edge of the toga twice in quick succession, once to emphasize a point and again to show restraint. It's emotionally dramatic but also controlled. The message, "I feel deeply, but I remain dignified." A quirky tidbit. Some senators practiced in front of mirrors, or had their slaves stand in for the audience during rehearsals. There are even stories of aspiring orators using weights to build up the arm strength needed to hold the toga's folds just right during long speeches. Forget leg day. Rome had drape day. And here's the funniest part: the toga wasn't actually all that great for oration. It was heavy, awkward, and limited arm movement. But that made it better, because if you could still deliver a powerful speech while wrapped in a woolen straitjacket. Now that was impressive. Wearing the toga well while speaking was a flex. It showed not only rhetorical skill, but also physical discipline. You had to gesture just enough to animate the cloth, but not so much that it slipped or tangled. You had to project your voice without sweating through your wool. You had to look effortless, even if you were dying inside. You watch the speaker shift tactics. He's softening now, lowering his voice, dipping his head. The toga follows, falling inward. He's not just making a point, he's becoming the point. And then, at the climax, he throws his arm wide, and the toga flares, a sudden burst of motion. Gasps ripple through the chamber. It's not just the words, it's the drama, it's the toga. Of course, not every senator could pull this off. You remember one unfortunate man, his name escapes you, who famously got tangled mid-speech, tried to gesture, caught his arm in a fold, and ended up looking like a man trying to escape a bedsheet ghost costume. The audience didn't remember his argument. They remembered the flailing. And in Rome, that was a death sentence. Reputations were fragile, and oratory was everything. One bad toga moment, and you could find yourself mocked for life. There's even a recorded case, though historians still argue whether it's apocryphal, of a senator who hired a rival's former toga assistant to sabotage his speech day folds. The rival's shoulder drooped, his hem dragged, and the audience got distracted by his constant fiddling. He was laughed off the floor. A political career undone by cloth. You shift in your seat, suddenly hyper-aware of how your own toga is sitting. You adjust a fold, then stop. Too obvious. You try again, more subtly. Better. You glance sideways. No one seems to notice. Or maybe they do, and that's the point. Because in this world, silence doesn't mean ignorance. It means judgment. You think back to the Stoic senator from earlier. His disheveled toga said, "I don't care what you think." But this orator, his toga says, "I do care, and I'll make sure you do too." It's two sides of the same coin. One wears the toga to retreat from the crowd, the other to command it. And then the speaker closes. A final gesture, sharp, clean, practiced. He lets the toga fall into place. A gentle whoosh, the fabric settles. A breath held and released. Applause, Roman style, a mix of clapping, murmured approval, and feet shuffled on marble. He steps down, his expression neutral. But you can tell, he knows he nailed it. You glance around the chamber. Other senators are already adjusting their togas, prepping for their own speeches. Some are fidgeting, others still. All of them are watching, measuring, planning. And you think, this isn't just a debate hall. It's a runway, a battlefield, a theater. And the toga, it's the spotlight. The sky darkens just slightly as clouds roll in from the western hills. You can hear the distant rumble of thunder, Rome's version of dramatic foreshadowing. And right on cue, the forum begins to stir with tension. You feel it in the way people walk faster, the way servants hustle to gather scrolls, and the way senators grip their togas tighter, like they're bracing for more than just rain. Because they are. You're standing at the edge of a moment in history. One of those tipping points where everything's about to go sideways, and the toga, ridiculous as it may seem, is coming with you. Rome is in crisis. Civil war brews. Factions form. Men who once nodded politely across the Senate floor now plot each other's assassination over wine. And in the middle of all this chaos, the toga starts to change. Not officially, not by decree, but in ways you can see and feel. You follow a group of senators through the forum as the first drops of rain begin to fall. It's not a polite drizzle, it's a full-on Roman downpour. Marble turns slick. Slaves scramble to cover benches with oilcloth. And the togas, they soak it all in like sponges. You watch the wool grow heavy, sagging at the shoulders, dragging at the hems. The clean folds dissolve into shapeless bundles. And still, the senators wear them, because they must. Because even in a literal storm, the uniform of Rome cannot be shed. It's almost poetic. Rome itself is unraveling, and its senators are walking through the wreckage, wrapped in soggy symbols of tradition they no longer seem to believe in. One man passes you, his toga soaked and stained with mud, the fabric clinging to him like a second skin. He doesn't look proud, he looks exhausted. And yet, he keeps walking. Because to show up without a toga, even now, even in these conditions, would be unthinkable. Historians still argue whether the decline of toga decorum during this period was a symptom or a cause of Rome's political decay. But you can see it happening in real time, the slippage of standards, the erosion of order. The toga used to be precise, perfect, controlled. Now, it's chaotic, quirky tidbit. There are letters from this era, private correspondences between senators, where they complain about the state of toga wearing in the Senate. One man laments that his colleagues arrive looking like butchers' apprentices, their garments stained, their folds unkempt. Another accuses a rival of deliberate sloppiness to win sympathy. Even in crisis, Rome finds time for fashion critiques. You duck under a colonnade as the rain intensifies, and from your shelter, you watch a group of senators huddled together. They're arguing, but not loudly. Not the way they used to. It's more cautious now, more paranoid, and their togas reflect it. No longer symbols of power or virtue, the garments now resemble battle-worn banners, torn at the edges, discolored. Some men have taken to shortening the hem, less formal, yes, but easier to run in. You don't need a historian to tell you what that means. One senator even wears his toga bundled around his waist like a sash, exposing his tunic underneath. Technically illegal, but who's enforcing dress codes when the Republic is eating itself alive? You think of the old statues, the ones that showed senators standing proudly, their togas arranged in perfect harmony, hands extended in graceful oratorical poise. Now compare that to the man slipping in mud as he tries to climb the Senate steps, his woolen robe dragging behind like a drowned dog. This isn't just a change in fashion, it's a visual metaphor for Rome itself. And the symbolism isn't lost on the people. The citizens watching from the market stalls, the guards posted along the walls, they see the shift. The once godlike senators now look just like everyone else, wet, cold, and a little bit scared. You overhear a whisper from a baker's apprentice. They can't even dress like Romans anymore. How will they save us? Oof. Because here's the truth. The toga was never just about fabric. It was about control. And when that control slips, when the folds fall apart, when the hem gets dirty, when the shoulder droops just a little too low, it sends a message. Not just about the man wearing it, but about the system he represents. You follow a group of senators into the Curia Julia, where the floor is streaked with muddy footprints and the air smells like wet wool and fear. No one talks about the rain. No one dares mention that they all look like they've just crawled out of a gutter. Instead, they pretend, they argue, they posture. But the togas tell the truth. They're too wrinkled, too loose, too human, and that's the worst part. Because the myth of the Senate, the myth of Rome, is that its leaders are more than men. They are symbols, ideals. Stoic, eternal. Wool doesn't lie. You spot an older senator near the back, his face lined like cracked marble. His toga is neat, impossibly neat, dry somehow, pressed into perfect folds. You blink. How? Then you see the trick, it's a spare. He had his slave carry a second toga, folded in a waxed box, protected from the storm. He changed just before entering the chamber. It's a power move. A message to the others, I am still in control. I am untouched. And it works. People notice. Heads turn. A few younger senators adjust their own folds, trying to mimic him. But it's too late. The rain has already marked them. The stains have already set. You step back outside as the storm begins to ease. The clouds break, just a little, and the forum glistens. And you wonder, how long can a civilization hold together when even its clothing is falling apart? Because if the toga can't survive the storm, can Rome? The rain has passed, but the tension hasn't. The air is thick with the scent of wet marble, churned up grime, and something else. Change. You feel it in the way people move through the streets now. Less confidence, more caution. Even the birds seem quieter. Rome isn't just recovering from a storm, it's recovering from itself, and that's when he arrives, Augustus, or as he still insists on being called at this point, Princeps, first citizen, not king. Never king. Just your friendly neighborhood, absolute ruler with a god complex and an excellent tailor. You see him before you hear him. The crowd parts, and there he is, calm, composed, every fold of his toga as precise as a marble statue. And not just a toga, the toga exigua, a more structured, tighter version, with stricter lines and less fabric to flap around like a political peacock. You blink. Is that a seam where there wasn't one before? A hidden stitch. Augustus's toga doesn't float, it stands. It's like the wool itself has been trained to obey. And that's the point. After years of chaos, civil wars, assassinations, and senators who looked like they'd slept in a beehive, Augustus is here to restore control. Order, respectability. He's not just rebuilding Rome's temples, he's rebuilding its visual language. And the toga? Oh, it's central to that. Historians still argue whether Augustus personally designed the new toga style, or whether he simply endorsed it. But the effect is undeniable. Under his rule, the toga becomes more rigid, more formal, and, let's be honest, more uncomfortable. Which is exactly what he wants. A loose toga says, I think for myself. A tight toga says, I follow the rules. You watch as senators begin to mimic him. Slowly at first. The odd cleaner hem here, a sharper fold there. But soon it becomes a wave, a movement, a fashion revolution with no music, no glitter, and zero comfort. And you're right in the middle of it. You visit your tailor slave. Yes, that's now a thing. And he shows you how to bind the new style tighter, how to tuck the sinus fold closer to the body. You learn to pin it higher, to walk with shorter steps, to hold your head a little straighter. You start sweating more, breathing less. But you look good. More importantly, you look loyal. Because that's what Augustus is really after. This isn't about aesthetics. It's about obedience. The new toga style is a kind of uniform. And uniforms do something very important: they erase individuality. Gone are the days of senators using their togas to rebel, to signal philosophical depth, to sneakily project power through dishevelment. Now, everyone's supposed to look the same. Neat, controlled, Roman, quirky tidbit. Augustus instituted laws that required citizens to wear the toga in public spaces like the forum and during court appearances. Not just senators, but all Roman male citizens. If you showed up in a tunic, you could be denied entry or fined. That's right. Fashion policing, imperial style. And it didn't stop there. He also cracked down on colors. No more casual purple trim unless you'd earned it. No more flashy embellishments. The toga had always been a garment of rules, but under Augustus, those rules were etched in stone. You remember seeing a young senator, ambitious, a bit too bold, arrive in a loosely styled toga, shoulder exposed in that old stoic way. He barely made it 3 steps into the curia before a lictor tapped his staff and gestured, "Fix it." He did, red-faced, as the older senators pretended not to smirk. You realize something then. The toga isn't just a garment anymore. It's a test of loyalty, of conformity, of submission. And the emperor, he's the grader. You start to see how Augustus uses the toga as part of his broader image strategy. His portraits always show him in the most elegant folds, modest, yes, but unmistakably perfect. He's often depicted with the capite velato, toga pulled over the head like a priest, signifying piety, tradition, Romanness itself. He's not just dressing up, he's dressing his regime. Historians still argue whether the Roman people truly bought into this visual rebranding or just played along out of fear. But the effect is clear: the messy, improvisational republic is gone. In its place stands a clean, polished empire. And the toga is the costume change that sells it. You miss the old wrinkles a little, the quiet rebellion, the way a senator could let his hem drag just enough to whisper, I see through this. Now, even that tiny act of defiance could be seen as dangerous. The new toga demands perfection. And perfection, as you've learned, is exhausting. You walk through the forum and see it everywhere. Senators standing stiffly like mannequins. Magistrates adjusting their folds with robotic precision. Even the statues seem to have straightened up. And yet, underneath the surface, you can still sense the tension. The longing for the old days. The messier days. When you could wear your wool like a banner, not a muzzle. But no one says it out loud. Because in Augustus's Rome, the toga isn't just clothing, it's propaganda, and the man who wears it best owns the story. You're walking the forum again, but something's changed. Not in the buildings. There's still the same marble temples, the same towering columns, the same ever-watchful statues of gods and dead senators. No, the change is in the people. Or rather, the fabric they're wrapped in. The togas are still neat, still structured, still tight in that Augustus-approved style. But not all of them. You start to notice little things. A fold that's just a bit too loose. A hem that drags half an inch longer than it should. A shoulder that's almost slipping. At first, you think it's sloppiness. Maybe someone's toga assistant had a rough morning. But no, it happens again, and then it clicks. This isn't an accident, it's a resistance. Tiny, quiet, and made entirely of wool. You're seeing the return of the messy drape. Not the full old-school chaos of the late Republic, but a slow, secret rebellion, one wrinkle at a time. Historians still argue whether this was a coordinated movement or just a shared mood, an unspoken agreement among senators who missed the freedom to look a little human. But to you, standing in the middle of it, it feels real, like a cloth-based conspiracy. You pass a group of senators engaged in hushed conversation. Their togas look fine mostly, but there's a slouch in their posture, a softness in the way their wool hangs. Intentional. You're starting to think so. One man, clearly older, with a streak of grey in his beard and a face like a lived-in leather sandal, stands with his toga pulled just a little too low. His belt is slightly off-center. The folds don't hold their shape, and yet he radiates confidence. Like he wants you to notice. He catches your eye, gives the slightest nod, and walks on. You feel like you've just been initiated into something. This is the subtle rebellion, the senator's quiet pushback against the imperial mold. They can't give speeches about liberty without risking their heads. They can't vote against the emperor's wishes without consequences. But they can let their toga wrinkle. It's the most Roman kind of protest, silent, symbolic and fashion-forward. Quirky tidbit. There are anecdotes, probably exaggerated, but delicious anyway, of senators who would carefully mess up their togas before entering the chamber, only to have their slaves secretly tidy them behind a column when guards were watching. The ultimate game of woolen cat and mouse. You start noticing patterns. Senators who were known for aligning with traditional Republican ideals tend to wear their togas just a bit differently. Not enough to be punished, but enough to be noticed by those who know how to look. A little extra fabric here, a slightly uneven fold there. The kind of imperfections that scream. I'm not entirely on board with this whole empire thing, but in a language only other senators can hear. It's risky, of course. There are eyes everywhere. Augustus may present himself as the humble, first citizen, but his spies are anything but humble. They watch, they listen, they interpret. Historians still argue whether any senators were punished purely for their toga choices, but we know at least a few were encouraged to dress more appropriately. And in Rome, encouragement could mean anything from a quiet word to a very public exile. You remember the story of Senator Faberius, famous for his subtly rumpled appearance and his not-so-subtle criticisms of imperial policy. One day, he showed up in a toga that hadn't even been chalked for weeks, a silent scream of protest in wool. Within a month, he was reassigned to a grain post in Egypt. No trial, no explanation, just gone. So yes, the stakes are high, but so is the symbolism. You talk with a junior magistrate who seems to have one foot in each world. His toga is mostly neat, but the hem is just a bit frayed. He tells you, with a conspiratorial smirk, we can't speak like Cicero anymore, but we can still dress like him. It's woolen code. And once you know it's there, you can't unsee it. You walk past the Senate steps and spot a trio of togas. One with a rebellious shoulder slip, another with too many folds bunched at the chest, and a third with a slightly crooked brooch. To the untrained eye, they're just minor imperfections. To you, they're a manifesto. It makes sense. The toga has always been a language, And now it's become a dialect of dissent. You try it yourself. Just a little. You let your belt loosen slightly. You tug the sinus a bit lower. You walk a little slower, shoulder slouched ever so casually. And sure enough, a passing senator glances at you. Not disapprovingly. Knowingly. You're in. But even small acts of defiance carry weight in a place like this. You overhear a whisper among palace guards. Watch the ones with the crooked folds. They're the ones thinking too much. You straighten your hem a little. Just enough to look forgettable. Because that's the game now. Stay visible, but not too visible. Speak, but only through cloth. Protest, but make it look like an accident. The toga has always been about identity. Now, it's about survival. And as the empire tightens its grip, the senators don't shout. They don't riot. They don't run. They wrinkle. You're in the atrium of a wealthy domus now, surrounded by gleaming marble, polished bronze, and servants who move like shadows, never making eye contact for more than a second. The wine flows, the figs are fresh, and you're suddenly very aware of how your toga is sitting. Not because it's uncomfortable, though it definitely is, but because this isn't the Senate. This is a private gathering, and here the rules shift. You're at a dinner party hosted by a high-ranking senator, someone with enough clout to walk the line between political loyalty and personal flair. The guests are a mix of magistrates, generals, poets, and a few very polished types who you suspect haven't read a single law, but know every lawmaker by name. And the togas? Oh, they're different here. Gone is the strict Augustan line. In its place, color, texture, flair, you spot a deep cream wool with a faint blue tint, probably from a foreign dye. Another man wears his toga unusually wide, letting it drape like a cape over both shoulders. One guest even appears in what looks suspiciously like silk. You blink, that's not regulation, but no one says anything, because in private, the toga becomes something else entirely, a costume, a signal, a peacock's fan. Out here, away from the Senate floor, togas become a playground for coded messages and status games. And there are so many games. You sit next to a younger senator, who leans in and whispers, "See that guy over there? The one with the pinkish hem. That's imported safflower dye. Technically not illegal, but very frowned upon. He's making a statement." What kind of statement? You ask. That he's rich, unbothered, and probably sleeping with someone important. Well, that escalated quickly. Historians still argue whether these dinner parties were more politically dangerous than the Senate floor itself. Here, alliances were made, reputations were wrecked, and ambitions were either fueled or quietly snuffed out. And the toga, how it was worn, what it suggested, was part of that. You spot a man with a perfectly folded toga, but the inside lining is embroidered, gold thread. You only see it when he shifts slightly to reach for a grape. It's a flash, a whisper of luxury. It says, "I know the rules, and I know how to bend them." Quirky tidbit. Some senators had secret togas, ones they only wore to private events, distinct from their public uniforms. These might have subtle patterns, richer dyes, or even imported fabrics woven in. One man was rumored to have a toga lined with Egyptian linen, a scandalously soft material that made him the envy of every back-channel dinner invitee. And then there are the behavioral statements. One guest casually lays his toga across both shoulders, technically incorrect for Roman formality, but here. It says, "I'm relaxed. I'm powerful enough not to care." Another wears his in a way that reveals more of his tunic underneath, a tunic that's suspiciously purple-tinged. Not senatorial purple, something else, something risky. You realize that even not wearing a toga can be a statement. One poet arrives in a simple Greek-style chiton. Everyone notices, no one comments. That silence says everything. You're starting to see that in Rome. Taboo wasn't a wall, it was a catwalk, and those brave, or foolish, enough to walk it could either rise like fashion gods or fall like wax statues left too long in the sun. But there are consequences. You overhear someone say, "Did you see Lucius at the last feast? Toga dyed like a Tyrian rug. Emperor didn't look pleased." A shrug. He's in Illyricum now, exile wrapped in velvet. Because even in private, the emperor hears everything. The walls of ears, the servants of memories, and the wrong hem in the wrong room can end your career before dessert. Still people push, because the toga isn't just a uniform, it's a weapon, a seduction, a flex. And tonight, you're watching it all unfold like a very slow-burning theatre performance where the script is written in wool and whispers. You sip your wine and glance down at your own toga. You chose a slightly softer wool for tonight. Not dyed but brushed. It hangs better, folds more naturally. You've let it drape a bit wider across your chest. You catch someone looking, not disapprovingly. You're learning. You lean back, adjust your fold with casual elegance, and listen. The conversations swirl around you, not in Latin, but in innuendo, politics, promotions, scandal, and through it all, the Togas speak their own language. One man subtly tugs at his fold every time someone mentions the emperor, hiding a nervous tic in a fabric flourish. Another never touches his toga at all, stiff, proud, maybe a little foolish. And then there's the host, gliding from guest to guest, his toga perfectly sculpted, not a wrinkle in sight. But you catch a flash beneath the edge, a lining of indigo silk. It's a risk, a nod to power, and maybe a wink at the future. You wonder how long he'll stay in Rome before being posted somewhere remote, or promoted somewhere closer. Because in these rooms, fashion is fate. And the toga is watching. You wake up the next morning with a slightly sore neck. Turns out sleeping in a carefully draped woolen toga isn't exactly ergonomic. But it's worth it. Because today, you're going to a toga party. And no, not the kind with red solo cups and bad Greek accents. This is the real deal, a Roman convivium, a social event where politics, pleasure, and performance all swirl together in a delicious, dangerous stew of ambition. You arrive at the domus just before sunset, the sky painted like an amphora, burnt orange and deep violet, and the servants already lighting oil lamps, their flames flickering against polished marble. The atrium is packed. Senators, magistrates, poets, a few women in fine stolas laughing behind jeweled fans, and every single man is dressed to impress. The toga, once again, has transformed. Gone is the rigid Augustan formality. Tonight, it's all about theatre. You see togas with exaggerated folds, practically sculpted into place. One man's has a sweeping sinus so wide it brushes the floor like a bridal train. Another's toga gleams faintly in the lamplight, silk. No, that would be scandalous. But maybe a silk blend, just enough to give it that look. And the colours, oh the colours, pale saffron, faint greys, tinted whites that hint at luxury without crossing the legal line. You even spot one senator with a blush-tinted toga, like rosewater had been spilled across the wall. Technically still white. Technically. Historians still argue whether these flamboyant toga variants were ever truly accepted, or just tolerated behind closed doors. But here, in this candlelit den of wine and wit, they're not just accepted, they're expected. Quirky tidbit, there was a whole genre of toga performance, senators who would deliberately prepare a party toga, with folds arranged to match their storytelling style. One man was known for adjusting his sinus to create a dramatic swoop every time he dropped a punchline. Another kept a secret pocket in his toga for surprise props, scrolls, figs, once even a tiny caged bird. You mingled, trying not to spill your wine on your newly brushed toga. You went with a classic cut but added a little flair around the fibula, just a hint of braided cord, dyed a tasteful bronze. It's subtle, but it says, I thought about this. And people notice. A portly senator with a toga that resembles a small tent leans in and says, nice twist at the shoulder. You're aiming for the modest innovator look, aren't you? You chuckle. Maybe. Smart, he says. Shows confidence, but not arrogance. That's what gets you past the door, and into the will. He winks. You suddenly understand how many careers have been made, and broken, at parties like this. You move to the triclinium, where the couches are arranged for dining. Everyone reclines on their left side, as tradition demands, and you're stuck trying to keep your toga from falling into the olive dish. Across from you, a young tribune tells a story about a toga disaster in the Senate. Apparently, someone sneezed during a speech, flailed their arm, and sent their hem flying into a consul's face. The room howls with laughter. And that's when you realize, for all its symbolism, for all its stiffness, the toga is also a character, a scene partner, a punchline, a prop. It makes people laugh, gasp, whisper. It's part of the drama of Roman life. And tonight, everyone's playing their part. You watch a senator stand to toss the host. His toga ripples with every movement. Not stiff, but fluid, like he's choreographed the folds to follow his speech. He raises his cup, and the sinus flutters just so, revealing the clean line of his tunic beneath. A calculated reveal. The audience, drunk or not, is impressed. Then someone challenges him, playfully of course. Nice speech, Varro, but do the folds hold up during a duel? Cheers erupt. Varro dramatically tightens his belt, raises his toga like a shield, and lunges forward with a wine ladle. His opponent parries with a breadstick. The room descends into mock chaos. It's ridiculous. It's theatrical. It's very Roman. Because here's the thing, the toga was never just about rules. It was about performance. And nowhere is that more true than here, in the domus of a wealthy patron, surrounded by laughter, low lighting, and the constant hum of political maneuvering. You glance over and spot a man sitting alone by the fountain, his toga perfectly arranged, his expression cold, no stains, no flair, technically flawless. But no one's talking to him, because even perfection has a price. You realize that in this world, too much polish can be worse than a wrinkle. It says, I'm trying too hard. I don't get the joke. And Rome always loves a joke, especially one wrapped in wool. You lean back, letting your own toga settle into a slightly more relaxed drape. You sip your wine. You nod at a passing guest who raises an eyebrow at your shoulder fold. You're not just wearing the toga tonight. You're using it. You're speaking its language. And maybe, just maybe, you're starting to write your own lines. You wake the next morning with a new understanding of the toga. Not just what it means in Rome, but what it means outside of it. Because the empire doesn't end at the city gates. It stretches across mountains, deserts, rivers, and seas. And wherever it goes, the toga goes too. Or at least a version of it. Today you're traveling, not far, just across the sea to one of Rome's many provinces. Let's say Gaul, or maybe Britannia. It hardly matters. The point is, you're no longer in the heart of the capital. You're in a town that calls itself Roman, but feels different. And the first thing you notice, the togas are weird. Not wrong, exactly. Just off, like someone tried to describe a toga from memory, and then made one out of curtains. The folds are loose. The colors are brighter. The whole garment looks lighter, shorter, more wearable, honestly. You see a magistrate wearing one that's been pinned at the shoulder with a giant, shiny brooch. Practical, yes, but pure blasphemy in Rome proper. And it's not just the style, it's the vibe. These provincial Romans wear their togas like they're proud of the idea of Rome, but not necessarily the rule book. One merchant walks by in a toga with a patterned border. You do a double take. Is that embroidery? Decorative stitching was strictly frowned upon in the capital. But here, it's normal. Celebrated even. People admire it. Historians still argue whether these regional toga variations were born from misunderstanding, local adaptation, or sheer colonial creativity. But one thing's clear: once Rome spread, the toga stopped being a single thing. It started mutating. Quirky tidbit. Some outposts in the east reportedly adapted the toga into something closer to a Greek Haitian, or even a hybrid with local cloaks. Lighter, easier to drape, and far more comfortable in hot climates. Imagine a Roman senator showing up in Alexandria, only to find the local governor wearing what looks like a toga, but feels like a beach cover-up. Scandalous, absolutely. But also kind of genius. You talk to a centurion stationed in the region. He tells you, with a smirk, the further you get from Rome, the less the toga suffocates you. He's wearing a short cloak over his armor. Not a toga, but he gestures to the local officials. They wear it like it's a badge, not a burden. You nod. Because that's the thing. In the provinces, the toga isn't weighed down by centuries of Senate procedure and political theatre. It's a symbol, yes, but a more flexible one. Out here, it means civilized. It means connected to power. But it doesn't have to follow every detail of the Augustan fold. You hear a story about a provincial governor who wore a toga backwards during a local festival. On purpose. It was a joke. A gag. A performance that had the crowd in stitches. Try that in the Forum and you'd be exiled. Do it in Gaul. You're the life of the party. You start to understand the toga, in these lands, is a costume of aspiration. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to say, I belong to Rome. And sometimes that message gets garbled. You attend a local ceremony where the town's elite gather on a raised platform. One man's toga is bright green. Another's is trimmed with fur. You spot a mix of Roman sandals and Gallic boots beneath the folds. It's like togas crashed into a local fashion market and decided to stay for dinner. You ask a local magistrate about it. He shrugs. We follow the spirit of the garment, he says in Latin with a thick accent. Not the letter. Back in Rome, that would be a punishable offense. But here, it works, because the toga has become cultural currency. A way for the provinces to show their Romanness, even if it's more wishful than accurate. And you realize something. All those senators back in Rome, stressing over shoulder drape and hem length, they think they're preserving tradition, upholding dignity. But out here, people are using the toga to dream forward. To say, we are Roman now too. even if they don't get the folds quite right. Historians still debate how much Rome cared about these provincial adaptations. Did central authorities look the other way, or did they see it as a necessary compromise? After all, enforcing toga regulations across an empire that stretched from Britannia to Syria would have been ambitious. You spot a mural on a local temple wall. It shows a Roman official, surrounded by locals. His toga is massive, almost comically so, and painted in bright crimson. That's not right, you think. But the locals clearly see it as a mark of honor, a sign of power. And just like that, the toga becomes a myth. Not just a garment, a legend. A look that tells a story, even if that story has been retold too many times and lost a few details. You pass a market stall where togas are sold in linen, not wool. Blasphemy in the capital. But here, it's sensible. The merchant even calls them summer togas, as if Julius Caesar himself wore them on vacation. You laugh. You buy one? Why not? Because here's the truth. The toga was never a fixed thing. Not really. It was always about what people thought it meant. In Rome, it meant power. In Stoic circles, virtue. In court, dignity. At parties, performance. And in the provinces, it means Rome itself, even if it's worn backwards, even if it's green, even if it's completely wrong. Because sometimes, wearing it wrong is the best way to say, I belong. It's early morning now, and you're back in Rome. The city's waking up around you, merchants calling from stalls, sandals clacking against stone, the occasional clatter of a cartwheel hitting a pothole that's probably older than half the senators in the Curia. But today, something feels different. You're walking toward a small gathering. Not a festival, not a Senate session, not even a dinner party. This is quieter, simpler. It's a group of people gathered in a shaded courtyard, heads bowed, voices murmuring in something between prayer and poetry. And none of them are wearing togas. You've stumbled upon a meeting of early Christians. And in their world, the toga is not a symbol of power. It's a symbol of everything they're trying to leave behind. You take a seat toward the rear, trying not to draw attention. The speaker, soft-spoken, sharp-eyed, talks about humility, about shedding earthly vanities, about rejecting appearances in favor of essence. And suddenly, the toga feels very heavy on your shoulders. Because to them, this woolen garment isn't just impractical. It's prideful. The toga, with all its folds and rules and unspoken messages, is the uniform of the elite, the oppressors, the ones who pass judgment in marble halls while the poor starve outside. And even worse, it's a symbol of pretending, of looking pious without being pious, of projecting morality while practicing corruption. Historians still argue whether early Christians actively avoided togas as a form of protest, or simply preferred simpler clothing out of practicality. But the effect was clear. When you saw someone in a plain tunic, belt tied with a scrap of rope, head bowed and hands clean, you knew they weren't playing Rome's game. And for Rome, that was unsettling. Quirky tidbit, there's a letter from a provincial governor, Pliny the Younger, asking Emperor Trajan how to handle Christians who refused to wear official garb in public ceremonies. Their rejection of Roman dress wasn't just fashion faux pas, it was defiance. Because while the toga had always been a symbol of conformity and citizenship, these new believers were saying, we don't want to belong to your world. And you can feel it. Sitting in that courtyard, surrounded by simple robes and honest eyes, the toga suddenly feels absurd, like wearing a crown to a funeral. You tug at your sinus, adjusting it out of habit. A nearby woman looks at you, not unkindly, but with something like pity. As if to say, you're still trying too hard. You realize she's dressed in a long, coarse tunic, not dyed, no jewelry, no fibula pin. And yet, she seems completely at ease. You, in your finely brushed wool, not so much. You remember what you've seen over the past weeks. Senators using their togas to manipulate crowds, orators flaring their folds like battle flags, philosophers wearing disheveled wool to signal virtue. And now, this group quietly rejecting the whole language of fabric. They're not wrinkling the toga on purpose. They're leaving it behind. You hear someone mention Paul of Tarsus. Yes, that Paul. The one who wrote letters that would become scripture. He once walked these streets too. And he likely wore the toga, at least early on. But later, the writings suggest a shift. A shedding of the trappings. A move towards simplicity that echoed through his followers like a bell. You wonder how that first generation of Christian senators, yes, they existed, navigated this tension. How do you sit in the Curia with a perfectly folded toga, knowing your faith tells you to clothe yourself in humility? There's a story, possibly apocryphal, of a senator who secretly converted to Christianity. Every day in the Senate, he wore his toga as required. But underneath, he wore a coarse tunic of haircloth. A private penance. A quiet rebellion hidden beneath the folds. That's the thing about Rome. Even when you try to leave the game follows you. The toga, whether worn, abandoned, or hidden, still speaks. You leave the courtyard with your toga folded over your arm now, not on your body. No one stops you. No one stares. But you feel different. Lighter. Like you've stepped out of character. And as you walk through the forum, you begin to notice the contrast more clearly. There's a group of boys practicing oratory near the rostra, their togas too big, slipping off their shoulders. They laugh and chase each other, folds flapping like sails. Their teacher scolds them back into line. Nearby, a merchant haggles with a senator's aide. The merchant wears a tunic stained with oil and flour. The aide wears a spotless toga with purple trim. They speak different languages, even though the words are the same. And in the distance, another quiet group gathers beneath a portico. No togas, no titles, just shared bread and soft hymns. The city of Rome is still Rome. But within it, new meanings are blooming, new symbols rising, and the toga. It's no longer the only story being told. Historians still debate when exactly the toga began to fall out of favor, but most agree by the late Empire, it was already fading. Too heavy, too formal, too tied to a world that was cracking at the seams. The Christians didn't kill the toga, but they outgrew it. They chose simplicity over symbolism, community over costume, truth over texture, and you're caught in between. You drape your toga over your arm again, casually this time. People still nod at you with respect, but you start to wonder, how long will this fabric still carry power? How long before it becomes just another relic? Because in a world where faith is replacing form, and humility is outshining hierarchy, wool just doesn't cut it anymore. The wind is different today. You feel it as you step out into the forum, cooler, sharper, like it's whispering through the cracks of something once solid, now slowly crumbling. The marble still gleams, the columns still stand, but the air hums with a quiet erosion. Rome is still here, yes, but it's not Rome, not the Rome you've known, and neither is the toga. You walk past the Senate steps, once the epicenter of Republican dignity, and see only a few men in togas now, and even fewer wearing them well. The folds are limp. The hems are frayed. One man wears his over a military cuirass, like a child trying to balance two costumes at once. It's not just fashion fatigue, it's a cultural collapse. The toga is dying, and no one seems to notice. Or maybe they do, and they just don't care anymore. You spot a group of soldiers lounging near a fountain, off-duty, drinking, laughing. Not a toga in sight. Tunics, cloaks, boots. One of them is even wearing pants. Pants. You shudder a little. Historians still argue whether the fall of the toga was slow or sudden, but the evidence is everywhere. By the 4th century CE, even high-ranking officials were opting out. The panula, a heavy cloak with a hood, was far more practical. It didn't wrinkle. It didn't drag. It didn't need a full-time assistant to fold it for you. The toga, once the voice of Rome, has become a whisper. And as the empire fractures, as barbarian kings rise and emperors fall like dominoes, the toga becomes a kind of tragic joke. A symbol of a world that can't hold itself up anymore. A garment for a people too busy surviving to dress for ceremony. You remember the statues. Hundreds of them scattered across Rome and beyond. Eternal senators forever frozen in perfect folds, arms extended in noble gestures. You used to think they were real. That men actually looked like that. Now you know better. Now you know they were lies in stone. Quirky tidbit. By the late Empire, some sculptors were just recycling old statues, shaving down the faces, carving new heads, but leaving the bodies intact. The toga was just background noise. No one cared if it was outdated or out of fashion. It was there. Good enough. You stop at one of these statues now, a nameless man in a toga, moss growing at his feet. A pigeon sits on his shoulder like a skeptical advisor. You look up and can't help but smile. He looks ridiculous, and noble, and irrelevant. You walk on. The Senate still meets, technically, but it's more ritual than power now. The real decisions are made elsewhere, by generals, bishops, warlords. The toga is still required for appearances, but even that's slipping. You see more and more Eastern robes creeping into the city, long tunics, sashes, silk cloth that moves with the world. The toga, for all its grandeur, was never built for movement. It was built to stand still, to pose, and now in a world spinning faster with each year, it simply can't keep up. You pass a shop selling used clothing. tunics mostly, some cloaks, a few strange hybrid garments stitched from both Roman and barbarian cuts, but no togas, not one. You ask the shopkeeper. He shrugs. Too much fabric, he says. No one wants to carry around 6 meters of wool anymore. You nod. Because of course they don't. You remember your first toga. The way it itched. The way it dragged. The way you felt like you were wearing a curtain and a corset at the same time. And yet, you also remember the power of it. How people looked at you differently. How it forced you to walk slower, speak clearer, stand straighter. How it made you feel like part of something bigger. Now, it just makes you feel tired. You think about Augustus and his perfect folds. About Cato and his itchy virtue. About the parties, the orators, the silent protests. About the Christians, the provinces, the rebels, the rules. All of it stitched into 6 meters of wool. All of it fading. You stop at the edge of the forum and look out over the city. There's still beauty here, but it's changing. The temples are being repurposed. Shrines to the old gods are now chapels to new ones. Latin still echoes through the streets, but softer now, intertwined with Gothic, Coptic, Syriac. And the people, they're no longer toga wearers. They're tunic wearers, cloak slingers, hood pullers. The toga has gone the way of the Republic, elegant, outdated, gone. Historians still argue whether the fall of the toga was inevitable. But you've seen enough to know it wasn't just about comfort. It was about meaning. And when the meaning faded, so did the fabric. You take one last look at your own toga, folded over your arm. You're not sure when you'll wear it again. Maybe never. Maybe that's okay, because symbols live and die with the people who believe in them. And Rome believes in something else now. The streets are quiet now, bathed in the soft glow of oil lamps and moonlight. You walk slowly, the weight of your folded toga resting in the crook of your arm, lighter than it used to feel, though that might just be your memory shedding layers. Rome at night is a different city. Fewer voices, fewer footsteps, and fewer expectations. You're no longer performing, no longer adjusting folds, or calculating hem lengths, or wondering who's watching. You're just walking, and thinking. About everything the toga meant, and everything it still whispers. Because even though it's gone from daily life, even though the senators wear cloaks now, and the street vendors wrap themselves in tunics and shawls, there's still something about the shape it left behind. A kind of echo. A woolen ghost that lingers in the folds of history. You pass under an arch where shadows pool like ink. Up ahead, a group of students sits in a circle, reading by lamplight. They're reciting Cicero, arguing about rhetoric, laughing. None of them are wearing togas. But their voices carry the same precision, the same rhythm, the same ancient urgency. They don't need the cloth. They've inherited the language. And that's what hits you. The toga was never really about the wool. It was about what the wool said. Every fold was a phrase. Every drape a declaration. Even when it was worn wrong, it was still speaking. And now, long after it seems have unraveled, you can still hear it. On courtroom steps, in graduation gowns, in choir robes, in judges' sashes, in the long, trailing sleeves of college professors, and the ceremonial hoods of university chancellors. The toga may be buried in a Roman grave, but its silhouette rises again and again. Quirky tidbit. The academic robe, yes, the one worn at modern graduations, draws direct inspiration from the Roman toga. It's a descendant of dignity, a stitched-up ghost of Roman authority. So the next time you see someone in a cap and gown, just know you're looking at a very polite, polyester version of a senatorial power move. And the message is the same. I earned this. I belong here. Historians still argue whether that symbolism was intentional or just a happy accident of fashion. But does it matter? The echoes are still there. You stop walking as you reach the top of a small hill, one of the 7, still dusted with the lights of homes and temples, and the soft outlines of statues that refuse to fall. You sit. You unfold the toga one last time across your lap. It's old now, frayed at the edges. The wool has softened. The hem is uneven, but it still feels like something bigger than you. Maybe that's what the toga always was. Not just a garment, but a mirror. A way to reflect who you were trying to be, stoic, noble, relatable, divine. Or maybe just seen. And now, it's a memory, but a memory that lingers, like the scent of lanolin in the folds, like the sound of sandals on marble, like the rustle of wool in a chamber where silence once meant power. You breathe in slowly, the air cooler now, the city quieter. You don't need to say anything. Rome is still speaking, not through speeches or scrolls or Senate decrees, but through the way its stories wrap around us. And maybe that's the final lesson of the toga. You can wear it wrong. You can wear it right. You can weaponize it, wrinkle it, rebel in it. You can abandon it entirely. But you can't unmake it. Because every time someone dresses for dignity, every time cloth is used to say, I matter, every time a fold becomes a flag, the toga lives again.